topic for this afternoon is how should we understand the link between hearing loss and dementia? And I'm Jan Blustein. I'm professor of medicine and population health at NYU. A little bit about me. Again, I've worked at NYU for the past 25 years. I've been primarily in the public policy school, but also in the medical school. And over the past 10 years, I've focused on hearing loss. I have a longstanding hearing loss. I am a member of the HLAA Board of Directors, but the views expressed here are mine alone and not those of the board or HLAA. A few things about today's presentation. I'm going to be talking about the consequences of hearing loss and the benefits of better hearing. My comments do not apply to members of the capital D deaf community who communicate via sign language. People who are capital D deaf do not seek better hearing. This presentation includes data diagrams that aren't meant to be taken literally. That is, they're not meant to portray actual numerical relationships. And I will be presenting lots of concepts and facts, and I'll also be expressing opinions. When I express opinions, I will label them as such. At least I hope I can do that, okay? Let me give an overview of what I'm going to say today. Many of us have seen news stories saying that hearing loss is a risk for dementia. But what does that mean? I'm going to be focusing on the meaning of the word risk. Saying that hearing loss is a risk for dementia absolutely does not mean that hearing loss plants the seed of dementia or that hearing loss is an early warning sign of dementia. I'll discuss several theories about how hearing loss and dementia may be linked, but this is an area where the science is incomplete. I will also emphasize the role of better hearing in keeping us active and promoting cognitive reserve and brain health. And my conclusion is going to be simple. Hearing better helps us think better, no matter what our age or underlying cognitive state. In the first part of this talk, I'm going to talk about how doctors and scientists use words differently than most people. So doctors and scientists have their own special vocabulary. When they talk to us using their vocabulary, this can lead to miscommunication. And so we can become confused and worried. And here's an example. Excuse me. Now, this is a comic that you probably can't see very well, so I kind of took chunks of it and put them on slides. Here are the first couple of panels. Here's Mr. Jones over here. He's feeling sick and he's been feeling sick and he's worried and he's going to go see his doctor. So there he goes into the clinic and he has a complete physical exam. His doctor examines him. And after the examination, the doctor tells him, you have spasmodic, episodic, diaphragmatic contractions and you have onychomycosis. And the doctor walks out of the room. And Mr. Jones is in despair. He says, I'm doomed. And the doctor's walking down the hall and he says, he'll be fine. As I told him, he just has hiccups and toenail fungus. Again, doctors and scientists have their own special vocabulary. When they talk to us using their vocabulary, we can become confused and worried. Here's a familiar example. Again, I'll take this bit by bit. Two people talking. I don't know whether you can see, they have those teeny weeny hearing aids, okay, the new ones. Have you heard that hearing loss is a major risk factor for dementia? Well, here's a doctor giving a talk. Hearing loss, the single largest potentially modifiable risk factor for dementia. There's the newspaper. People with hearing loss are at risk for dementia. We're doomed, right? We're doomed. Wait a minute. Exactly what do scientists mean by risk? And that's what we're going to be talking about this afternoon. Exactly what scientists mean when they say that hearing loss is a risk for dementia. In everyday language, in the language that we would use routinely, risk refers to something that causes a bad outcome, like not wearing a seatbelt. It's a risk for injury in a crash. But in scientific language, risk just means that two things go together. All of these are true scientific statements about risk. Eating ice cream, and when I say risk with orange capitals, I mean risk as the scientists use the word risk. So all of these are true statements about risk. Eating ice cream is a risk for forest fires. Nightlights in infants' bedrooms are a risk for poor vision. Hearing loss is a risk for dementia. Those are all true scientific statements. And hearing loss is a risk for dementia, and I put risk in caps in orange, that means in scientific language, unfortunately comes to us and we understand it with our understanding of risk, and we think that means that hearing loss causes a bad outcome. It suggests that hearing loss plants the seed of dementia. It suggests that hearing loss is an early warning sign of dementia. So we think, and when we see this, we think this: hearing loss plants an early dementia seed or somehow precipitates dementia, which in turn leads to dementia symptoms. That's what we think. That's a misunderstanding. Just like toenail fungus, it's a misunderstanding, okay? All right, what do scientists mean by risk? So I said before that there are two scientific facts I wanted to talk to you about this afternoon. The first one is that ice cream consumption is a risk for forest fires, and the other one is that nightlights in infants' bedrooms increase the risk of poor vision. Let's discuss the data that supports these scientific statements. Here's the data that shows that ice cream sales are a risk for forest fires. This data display shows trends in sales of ice cream over a year. So those are in green. So ice cream sales, here are the months of the year: December, January, February, March. And here is in green ice cream sales, not much ice cream sold in December or January. Come spring, we begin to have more ice cream sold, and then peaking in August and then down again in the fall. Well, that's interesting. How about forest fires? Well, forest fires start pretty low in the winter. They're not very many. They start to pick up in the spring and summer, up peaking again in August and coming back down. So in scientific terms, we would say these two things travel together. You might have heard the words correlation, okay? These two things are correlated. When this one is low, when sales are low, forest fires are low. When sales are high, forest fires are high. Wow, those are correlated. So in scientific terms, we would say ice cream consumption is a risk for forest fires. They go together. Based on this scientific finding, should we recommend that people abstain from eating ice cream in order to prevent forest fires? Should we blame ice cream lovers for the destruction of our forests? No. We need further information to assess this risk. In this case, if you dig a little deeper, you might find that this risk or correlation has something to do with the weather. Ice cream sales and fires travel together because of a third factor, the weather. When it's hot, there's more ice cream sold, and the heat also causes the land to be more vulnerable to fire. When it's cold, there's little ice cream sold, and there's not much risk of forest fires either. We don't need to worry that by eating ice cream, we are destroying forests. The risk connection between ice cream sales and forest fires is somehow broken when we take the weather into account. That helps us to understand why these two things travel together. Another scientific risk relationship is that between that of nightlights in infants' bedrooms, that is whether babies have a nightlight in their bedroom, and the risk of poor vision as they get to be older kids. And this is some real data from the journal Nature, which is a big deal scientific journal some years back. Infants who sleep with night lights or room lighting at night are at risk for nearsightedness relative to those who sleep in the dark. Well, how did researchers find this risk relationship? Well, they got together a group of kids in mid-childhood and measured their vision. Then they asked the parents to recall how the children's bedrooms were lit at night in infancy. And the chart that you're seeing displays the data. As you can see, there is a substantially elevated risk for nearsightedness among infants who are exposed to night light. When we look at the amount of, when vision was measured later in childhood, and that is the percent of children with some degree of nearsightedness, among those who slept in the dark, it was 10%. Among the kids who slept with a night light, it was 32%. And among those who had a complete room light, it was 55%. In other words, the amount of nearsightedness travels with the amount of night light. It's correlated. Night light is a risk for nearsightedness. Why might that be? The researchers who reported this data theorized that because the skin over infants' eyes is especially thin, babies can't protect themselves properly from night light when they sleep. And they hypothesized that that's why night lights are risky for infants. And while the researchers acknowledged that this was only a risk relationship, risk, capital risk, orange, a risk relationship, they recommended that as a precaution, infants should sleep in entirely darkened rooms. Well, it turns out that that wasn't true when we looked a little closer, okay? It turned out that in this study, the parents who had the worst vision were the ones who put their infants to sleep with lights, right? In other words, because the parents couldn't see well, they put night lights in their kids' rooms. Parents who had good vision could see just fine, and they put their kids to sleep in the dark. On this side, parents who had worse vision also had children who had worse vision. I imagine that's a genetic relationship, okay? That's just the way things are. Again, this just shows that just because something is a risk for something else, just because these two things go together, like night lights and poor vision, that doesn't mean that night lights cause poor vision, right? I'm just going to stop for a minute and let you digest this. Okay, I'll continue. What I'm saying is that we should be informed skeptics when researchers tell us about risk. We need to look deeper when we see research reports about risk. Risk, capital risk with orange, the science word, just means that two things go together. Risks are often not causes. When we learn about a risk relationship from a researcher or in a media report, we should remember that risk is being used in a technical, scientific sense. When we get a warning about a risk, orange caps, we should seek further information. So let's get the further information with respect to the relationship between hearing loss and dementia. In order to do that, let's lay the ground of some medical vocabulary and then review the data. We'll look at how you might do a study of the relationship of hearing loss to dementia to assess the degree of risk. And we'll also look at other things that are risks for dementia. So one of the big pieces of vocabulary, of course, is hearing loss, which I think everyone understands pretty well. But we may not understand some of the other terms quite so clearly. What do we mean by cognition, cognitive decline, and dementia? Let's look at those. Cognition is thinking. So cognition includes remembering, understanding, planning, and more. And cognition can be measured using special tests, which can be scored. So probably some of you have had cognitive tests or know somebody who has had one. This the draw clock test, the one, remember these 3 words when I ask you again in 4 minutes. That's a cognitive test, okay? So cognition is thinking, and you can measure the quality of thinking and score it. Cognitive decline and dementia are not synonymous. I want to say that again. Cognitive decline and dementia are not synonymous. Cognitive decline means a score drop from a prior level. So here we're talking about cognitive score drops. Here's a 0, which is a low score. Here's 100, which is a high score. Normal aging brings decline in some aspects of cognition. That's normal, okay? Not in all aspects, but in some, okay? So normal aging looks like this. And what we're seeing here is time. Here's young adulthood, and here's older age. I'm sorry. Dementia is entirely different from cognitive decline. It's characterized by extreme cognitive decline and eventual loss of function. It's a drop-off, okay? That's not cognitive decline, it's dementia, and it's a complicated disease to diagnose, a complicated condition to diagnose, and we're really talking about something else. Although dementia may be characterized by relatively poor scores on a cognitive test. Dementia is a word that is very scary for all of us, I think. And I think we all have friends or family members who have or have had dementia. It's not a single disease, but it's a set of syndromes. It's a set of degenerative brain disorders with specific changes in brain cells. Okay, something very specific. And the different specific forms are Alzheimer's disease, which is probably the one that's most familiar and most common. Vascular dementias, that's dementia from stroke, and Lewy body dementia, which is another kind of cellular change. All types of dementia result in progressive decline in cognition and eventual loss of function. And despite decades of research, almost nothing is known about the causes, treatment, and prevention of dementia. I want to emphasize that last point, because if anybody tells you that they know the cause of dementia, you should be very suspicious of that, okay? That's something that scientists have been working on for a long time and have gotten not very far. Let's talk about the evidence on some things that are all risks for dementia. So I said hearing loss is a risk for dementia, but also not being married actually is a risk for dementia, and having less education is a risk for dementia. Let's look at these. First, this is an important slide because it shows you what the data would look like in a study that showed that hearing loss is a risk for cognitive decline in dementia. Okay. To do a study like this, what you need to do is you need to have two groups of people. One group has normal hearing, and the other one has hearing loss. And often in a good study, that people with hearing loss will be untreated. They won't have a cochlear implant or a hearing aid. Okay, so normal hearing versus hearing loss untreated. And what we're going to do is start the study and then end the study many years later, okay? And the two groups start at the same high cognitive level. You pick people who are all very cognitively intact, and you watch their cognition scores over time. And what we're saying here, and again, this is a cartoon, it's not real data. At some point, the cognition scores get so low down here that I would say they're consistent with dementia. As I said before, dementia is a complicated diagnosis. But if you have very low cognition scores, the chances are good that you have dementia or have another serious disease. Okay. So what the finding would be here would be everybody starts off at the same point and everyone declines over time. But the people who have hearing loss that's untreated decline more than the people who have normal hearing, right? They've declined at a greater rate. And they have ventured down into the area of very low scores, which might suggest that they have dementia, okay? So that's what the data would look like. And over time, then in the study, hearing loss versus no hearing loss, or normal hearing versus not normal hearing, goes with the degree of cognitive decline and the degree of dementia, okay? Or the number of people with dementia. I hope that's clear, and I'm gonna, I wish this were more interactive, but I'm gonna let you just look at the chart for a second. I'm also going to look at the chat and see if anybody's saying that I'm talking too fast. Some people giving me a little bit of correction on the slides. Okay, we can talk about that in the Q&A. Whoops, got to get rid of that. Okay, let's keep going. So that's the way we look at the relationship between hearing loss and cognitive decline and dementia. Okay, I don't know whether you know this, but not being married is a risk for cognitive decline and dementia. And it's interesting because a very similar pattern has been found in studies of the relationship between marital status and dementia. Again, these studies have been done many times, and they often find the same thing. Not being married is a risk for cognitive decline and dementia. To see this, investigators use the same approach that was used in the hearing loss studies. Subjects are divided into two groups, those who are married and those who are not married. And it's tricky what you call married and not married, and we could go on and on about this, but we won't. Typically, those who are not married are those who are widowed or never married. Again, the study is set up so that everybody starts at a relatively high level of cognition, and then the group that is married declines, but the group that is not married declines more. And by the time the study ends, there are more people in the not married group who are in the very low score than people who are married. Okay. The study findings show then that over time, being not married goes with dementia. Or to put it in scientific terms, people who are not married have a higher risk of dementia than people who are married. Same thing. Okay. Interestingly, another factor that goes with dementia is low educational attainment. And this slide, I'm going to give you just a minute to read for yourself because I think it's a little bit complicated. Let me say it now. In explaining the fact that being less educated is also a risk for cognitive decline and dementia, experts often talk about cognitive reserve. That is, the cognitive power that education adds that allows people to be less cognitively symptomatic in the face of dementia challenges. In other words, according to this theory, being less educated doesn't plant the seed of dementia, but being more educated helps you cope when and if the dementia seed is present. This is important. Lack of cognitive reserve could also explain the risk of hearing loss and the risk of not being married. Both of these conditions could reduce cognitive reserve through social isolation. I'm looking at my clock and I see that I've been talking for half an hour, and I bet your brain is tired. We're going to go on just a little bit and then we'll have Q&A. So how does hearing loss increase the risk of dementia? We don't know. We don't know. We don't have the additional information that would allow us to more fully understand the risk, and we can only speculate. There has been lots of speculation. Here comes a very busy slide, okay, that describes 4 different theories of how hearing loss is related to dementia, okay? And I'm going to focus on 2 of them, number 1 and number 3, okay? So the first one, and full disclosure, this is going to turn out to be my favorite. Nobody knows, but this one I think is the most consistent with the data. Hearing loss leads to reduced communication and therefore social withdrawal, and therefore less brain stimulation, and therefore less cognitive reserve, and therefore a reduced ability to cope with dementia if and when it comes. Okay, so in other words, the reduction in cognitive reserve means that if and when the person develops dementia, they will not do as well. A direct biological theory is that hearing loss plants the seed, basically, okay? Hearing loss leads to reduced auditory stimulation, which leads to atrophy of auditory parts of the brain, which leads to spread of changes from the auditory system to cells throughout the brain, which leads to dementia. Both of these are simplifications, and there are probably variants of this. Let's not worry about these too much right now because we don't have the time or the brain, the brain space. But those are the kinds of theories that scientists have used to explain the risk relationship between hearing loss and dementia. I want to tell you now how I think about hearing loss and dementia risk, okay? And I think there's a dementia seed that unfortunately causes some people to develop dementia. And some people have that seed and some people don't. There's no relationship between having that dementia seed and hearing loss. But if you have the dementia seed and you have hearing loss, your dementia symptoms may appear earlier due to your reduced cognitive reserve, which arises from social isolation. That's the risk. Again, I'm going to give you a moment for your brain to take this in. And here's the same thing written as a diagram. Okay, so hearing loss causes social isolation, which causes reduced brain stimulation, which reduces cognitive reserve, and that results in changes in the brain. So we would expect to see, with untreated hearing loss, brain changes. The reduced cognitive reserve, in turn, if the dementia seed is present, leads to the earlier detection of or manifestation of dementia symptoms. Okay, again, a lot to take in, but this is the way that theory would work. Note, and again, this is my favorite theory, hearing loss is not related to the dementia seed. It's completely independent, okay? But if you have hearing loss, it makes you in some way more likely to manifest the dementia seed earlier if the hearing loss, we're going to say in a minute, is untreated. Okay, so let me move on. So that was bad news. If we go back, that was bad news. If you have hearing loss, you're more vulnerable to have dementia symptoms earlier. And then what? The good news is that treating hearing loss may increase or restore cognitive reserve, breaking the link between hearing loss and dementia. In other words, hearing better helps you think better, okay? So if you have hearing loss and you treat the hearing loss with knowledge about how to manage your hearing loss and devices, you can break the link between hearing loss and dementia symptoms by stopping it right here. You don't have social isolation, or you figure out a way to be less socially isolated. You don't have this, you don't have this, and then you don't have this problem. Sorry. So in other words, this is gone, all this stuff is gone, and all you have is just your regular old, if you have the dementia seed, you have it, and you progress to dementia for whatever reason you do. In other words, I would say hearing better helps you think better. And here are the big messages, I think, for today. Give you a minute to look at that yellow. Okay, let's compare that with our initial misunderstanding, which is that we're doomed, right? That hearing loss directly causes planting or the establishment of a dementia seed, which means that we will go on to have dementia symptoms. Why am I so dismayed by the misunderstanding that is the result of the miscommunication from the scientific and clinical community about hearing loss and dementia? As a person with hearing loss, I'm dismayed because the way we talk affects the way we think about ourselves, right? A lot of people with hearing loss have dementia worry. I cannot tell you the number of times I've had somebody come over to me and say, I have hearing loss, I'm terrified about dementia. Okay, so that's not good, and it's not true. And also, it's we have self-stigmatization. We have further reason to worry that we're not up to snuff. The second reason this is dismaying to me is that it affects the way those of us with hearing loss are viewed by others. And I view my phrase for this is under suspicion of dementia. So if you believe what you're hearing in the air, hearing loss is a risk for dementia, and you see somebody with hearing loss, that person's going to be pressured to show that they're always with it. You know, if you make a mistake, probably that's a manifestation of your dementia. And importantly, I think there's potential for discrimination and exclusion, discrimination in the workplace, discrimination in the long-term care insurance market. If anybody here is interested in long-term care insurance, if you have any risk for dementia, you're not going to get that insurance. Well, now we have the idea that hearing loss is a risk factor for dementia, so best of luck. Let's see. I think I have one more slide. I think together we can help set the record straight. And I think that the best way to think about this is that hearing better helps you think better, no matter what your age or stage in life. That would be the message that I would prefer. In other words, let's treat our hearing loss to make our lives better in so many ways. Our hearing aids are not dementia preventers. There are things, and our cochlear implants or our knowledge about hearing loss is a way for us to live better. And that's the most important thing there is. Okay, that's what I've got. I guess I should stop sharing my screen, right? And I'm going to let Melissa take over now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that was really very valuable, very interesting. I do think there's been some discussions in the chat. If you maybe want to take a quick look there. And folks, if you have questions, go ahead and raise your hands and then we'll call on you.
So someone there has said raised hand features is under reactions. If you want to raise your hand, you go at the bottom
Yes,
part of the screen under reactions.
that is correct.
Someone asked, will we be able to have copies of the slides? Yeah, I'll get those together. Oh, I see. Somebody already answered this. Missing the word and modified post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. I don't know what that means, Neil, but it sounds interesting. Wendy Pachter says, as a scientist, I would usually call it a correlation when we don't know the direction and risk when we know what factor comes first and therefore might be causal. But it's always important to eliminate confounding variables. Wendy, I agree with you. I don't think that something's a risk because we know which factor comes first and therefore might be causal. I think we can have risk with reverse causation, but we could discuss what scientists mean by words. I'm not sure that's really important for this discussion, but I'm happy to have that discussion offline or an email or whatever. Helen George, I would like to know how they define married. And a lot of people who are not married have significant others who act as spouse. Of course. Okay, so I dug into this literature a little bit, Helen. I found this, it's complicated, right? I think that the answer to this is that probably, well, I don't know why this is. My guess is that probably on average, somebody who is not married is on average is more sexually isolated than on average a person who is married. We could dig into this, but this finding is very robust. And in the slide that I showed, I linked to a study that synthesized all the studies and might be worth your reviewing. I agree. This is highly iffy. Any man on here want to get married? Sorry, just a little humor. So yeah, I mean, does that mean that we could decrease our risk of it? Should we just hand out marriage licenses and cure dementia is basically, I think, the joke here. Couldn't resist. This is extremely helpful. Definitely clearing up a lot of misconceptions. Great. Again, a person says not being married, living alone. That's there you go. So I agree. This is not, maybe this is a bad example. But there it is. I mean, I sort of struggle to find an example that will illustrate that there are other pathways to social isolation besides not being able to hear. Okay, so if anybody has an idea of what those might be, as they say, I'm all ears, but I'm really only one. Okay. I like number 2. Since I lost my hearing in 2015, I definitely have noticed a cognitive decline. Well, okay, so that may be, and we don't know whether you would have noticed that without losing your hearing. And when you have a hearing loss, one of the jobs you have, and it's a really sometimes I'll only speak for myself, and this is not clinical expertise, but or scientific expertise, it's personal experience. I have a pretty significant hearing loss. Believe me, I'm not going to any loud restaurants, or I'm not doing, there are a lot of things I don't do, but I make an effort to be socially engaged in other ways. I have one person over to my house for dinner, right? Or I meet a couple of people in the park and talk to them. So if you're finding that you're cognitively not where you want to be, you might want to try tricks like that. If this doesn't come off the way it should, I'm sorry. And please come back at me in the next part. I see more messages, but I'm unable to click down to them. Whoops. Why don't I
All
stop
right.
talking and let you guys talk? How about that?
Well, I was going to say, I think Tony has his hand up. Tony, if you want to unmute yourself and
Hi, yeah, Jan, thanks for this interesting conversation. I mean, it does seem to put us a little bit at ease with the hearing loss. But in my case, my father has dementia as well as hereditary hearing loss. Is that a couple questions? So is this the hereditary loss? And do you think that is what you're referring to, the dementia seed, since he's got hearing loss and dementia right now? That's probably started at least 10 years ago, and he's 94 now. And the other question is about the correlation, if you know, of the correlation between the dementia and the severity and onset, age of onset of hearing loss. Is there a correlation with that too? Mine, because I was born with hearing loss, I think that demon seed, dementia seed is there.
No, no. So I think the first question is sort of, what do I mean by dementia seed? Is that what you're asking, kind of?
Yes.
So answer to that is, I don't know what I mean by that. And no, neither does anybody else, okay? I mean that there's something that we don't know that causes some people to develop dementia and others not. I think there's perhaps the most information about this in the case of Alzheimer's disease, where it looks like, for example, some genetic variants predispose people to develop Alzheimer's disease. It's not completely determinative, right? People can have this genetic makeup and they don't develop dementia, and people can not have it and develop Alzheimer's disease. So I don't have any words of wisdom on dementia seeds. I'm just thinking about, well, the only scientific piece I can give you is that it's beginning to look like dementia. Before you see signs of dementia, 20 years before that, there's something going on, okay? So this is something that takes place over a very long time, which in a way argues against hearing loss being the cause of it, in the sense that most people who have hearing loss have it in later life. But did that answer your first question, Tony?
Yes, it does. Yeah, and certainly the second part was the link between dementia and age of onset and severity of the hearing loss. I mean, I got
Yes, yes. I don't know about age of onset. There have been some studies have found a relationship between severity of hearing loss and dementia risk. Okay. Again, remembering what risk is. But not all have found that. So, for example, in some studies, people who have severe hearing loss, and this is the most robust finding, people who have severe hearing loss have the greatest risk for cognitive decline and dementia.
And certainly the age of onset too. I mean, I would think the more, because dementia is a growing, it's over time, but there's gradual. And I always wonder if it's the normal aging process for me, or if it is because of the dementia that runs in the family. Is it because of the hearing loss? I mean, I'm not sure. And I don't want to get myself like, my dad, because of his very little. He can't go to a restaurant and order from the menu. He doesn't know. He doesn't think. There's a lot of issues with having dementia,
Sure.
and certainly I would hope that there's something by the time I get to be 94 that there'll be something, some answers for us.
I think we're all hoping that there'll be progress in this field. It's been very, very stubborn, and it's really scary, particularly for people who have parents who have dementia and watch them go through. I understand where you're coming from. Yeah. Who's next?
Janine is. Janine, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. This was very interesting and informative. I just have a few comments. I also had a situation with my father. He was extremely intelligent. He was a member of Mensa. And in his 80s, he started having hearing loss and he wore hearing aids. He still developed dementia, really bad. I know I took care of him. And the thing is, I agree about the isolation problem. My first feeling is that if you're mentally stimulated, it helps. I think, first of all, when people get older, the chances are greater that they might get hearing loss. The chances are greater that they might get dementia. I'm not sure I believe that the two are connected. They could just, you can have people getting dementia who have perfect hearing and people with hearing loss that don't get dementia. And I didn't see that much difference in your graph with the scores in cognition between normal hearing people who aged and those with hearing loss. There wasn't enough of a difference to convince me. And I have a question. You say that if we treat our hearing, that we'll think better. I'm not sure what treating means. If you have a hearing loss, you always have it. If you take out your hearing aid or the implant, you can't hear.
Right.
And my question to you is, I'm concerned about those of us like me who have auditory nerve impairment. I have tried hearing aids and neck loops that increase the sound. But because of my auditory nerve impairment, I'm not understanding the words of people. So how is this helping my thinking? I try to come.
Yeah. So
let me
you have
finish.
a lot of questions, don't you? You're not really sure. I understand that. I can't comment on your auditory nerve dysfunction, and that's a really tough problem to deal with. But I guess my suggestion is to get all the help you can and to enlist all of the people in your social circle that you can and find workarounds to problems. I mean, this is what I find to be very effective to say, okay, I
Excuse
can't
me,
do this.
I'm sorry.
And we can do that. You know what? Let's let somebody else have a chance to ask a question, and then maybe we can come back together and talk at another time.
I
Okay.
just want to finish by saying that I use captioning.
Mm-hmm.
And
Fantastic, right?
I'm college educated, I'm intelligent, I read a lot. So even if I don't hear sound completely, will my brain still be okay?
Well, you know, I don't know how my brain is. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know if this is all things that we can't know. I think everybody has to hold their head up and say, I am trying to do everything I can to maintain my connection to the world. And that is the best we can do. That's
Um,
purely my opinion. Okay.
Jen, I think Carol had a question,
Okay.
and Carol, you'll have to unmute. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I think it's very difficult to address something where people have as much fear as we've all been taught to have. in a universe where there really isn't adequate knowledge. There's no proof doing this will prevent that. I
Mhm.
mean, that research just doesn't exist. But I wanted to raise a couple concerns, a couple of statements. One is that all hearing, well, first, I think there's a lot of publicity about this. I'll use the word association between dementia and hearing loss. And I see some hearing aid companies seem to be using that as a marketing thing. So here, get terrified and then buy my $5,000 item. The $5,000 item might be exactly what the person needs, but I really personally resent marketing via terror. I just feel so exploited and so angry. That's different from being informed. So that's one of my pet grouches. So thank you for letting me share that.
Yeah, I share that grouch. And I did a study with some of my colleagues on hearing aid company advertising on the internet and the extent to which they use this sort of bomb, and it was very prevalent among the so-called reputable companies. About half of the ones that are in the consumer reports, recommended, were using this as a threat. And I say, let's get hearing aids because they're good, because they help us live. I mean, what could be better than having a better life, to be socially engaged? What could be better than that? And that, but I'm not doing it to prevent dementia. That's not why I'm doing it. And I think you're right. I think that they're trying to scare us, and I think that's not good. I think that when you look at this message, you have to follow the money. You have to think about who is benefiting from this message. And there are a lot of people who have ridden the wave of the crest of the wave of hearing loss is a risk for dementia. I hope that that wave is breaking,
Thank you. And I would love to see the results of your research on that so that I could have something to wave at people. So maybe
Absolutely.
that could
And
be
you can
put in
you're
the
welcome to
chat or
contact
something.
me. You just Google me and find my address at NYU, and I can send you paper. I've been very interested in this deception, as I would do, not this deception, this promulgation of information that's kind of ambiguous and is, I think, in some sense, intended to frighten people.
Yeah, I think it's a fear tactic. So
Yeah,
great.
nice to meet
I
you.
want to point out that I'm also tired of seeing things that say, if you have this fear, if you have hearing loss, treat your hearing loss. Because treating hearing loss is not always equal. I have many friends who have late in life hearing loss. They get some hearing aids, they pick up a lot of speech, and they're off and running. I've had hearing loss for, since my mid-40s, and it doesn't treat as well. And it's progressive, and it affects my social interaction greatly. I can talk to one person at a time.
Mhm.
It's hard to be in social groups in that difficulty. And I kind of resent the public statement that treating hearing loss will address this. I'm sure I'm better off with the treatment I have than I would be without it. But all treatments do not result in equal results because we don't have equal hearing problems. So I just want to grouch about the simplicity of such statements.
Do you think that the statement "hearing better helps you think better" is not a good statement?
No, that I totally agree. I hear better than I would without them. That helps my thinking 100%. But the treating hearing loss is the intervention that will reduce dementia because you have better thinking. You get different results depending on how your hearing loss is treatable.
Thank you.
So not the same for everyone. And
I think, Carol, I think you're muted.
I don't know what I did, but this myth that, or the research that says that married people have less dementia. And yes, all the definitions of marriage, let's include them, but I never see that broken out by sex. And in an extremely patriarchal, sex-limited world, I suspect that men who have an even bigger epidemic of loneliness, if we believe what we read on the internet, which I'm not sure, benefit greatly by having someone in their life who will
Okay.
interact with them regularly. I think
Okay.
women tend to have better social networks, and that maybe being married does not
Yeah.
have as much
Okay, so
benefit.
we can look at those. If you want to email me, I can send you those and you can pursue that. Patricia Schmeck says, please let others speak.
Go for it. Thank you.
I think that's true. I
Thanks
think
so
we've got,
much.
May had a question as well. May, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, I do. Hello. I really appreciate the presentation. I just had to ask, are we aware of social prescribing, which is a new idea that's gradually becoming known? I'm quite excited about it, actually.
I'm aware of it. Why don't you tell us what it is?
It's a practice by doctors and pharmacists, whoever can prescribe, which would, instead of or along with prescribing medication, prescribe social activity. For instance, my doctor might recommend that I get in touch with the local senior center and find out what the activities are. And it's a way of dealing with or countering somewhat the social isolation, which I firmly believe is a very, very important piece of dealing with life in general. Thank you.
Sure, makes sense, right?
I think Becky Montgomery also had a question. Becky, if you're there, if you want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I have to remedia myself. Actually, I have a question that's really different from the ones that have been asked so far. But does have to do with your presentation. So I hope that's okay to change the subject a little bit. I'm curious about what you said about cognitive reserve. I mean, I just wanna, I mean, I guess one of the things is that, you know, just in the line also of what you were talking about the way that scientists might use terminology versus the rest of us might use terminology, that I would think of a reserve as being excess capacity.
Mhm.
But then you said education adds to it. And I thought, could you just talk a minute about that?
Sure. So cognitive reserve is so when we talk about these problems, we talk about it using two different kinds of scientific vocabulary. One kind is psychological, which has to do with function. And the other one is neurological or having to do with the nervous system, and that has to do with structure, right? So presumably we have these brains that are structures that cause us to do things, which are functions. And we're very bad at understanding how those two things relate, okay? So we know that there must be a brain that's making these things happen, but what we can describe is function, okay? And cognitive reserve is a psychological or functional construct or idea that is increasingly used to basically refer to the mind being healthy and a corresponding brain health. And I don't know whether I've just used so much gobbledygook that I'm not clear, but the idea here is basically brain health. Cognitive reserve is the psychological analog of brain health. And there's, for example, there's a psychologist at Columbia called Jakob Stern who talks about this. I think it's a real thing. I don't think that he thinks he knows what it means in terms of brains. I don't think we know how education would increase cognitive reserve, but intuitively, I can imagine it. You know, if you're in a confusing situation and you have more education, you might be able to, you have some reserve to be able to kind of like mull it over, I guess. I don't know. This is not my field of expertise for sure. And it's something I'm hoping to learn more about. And if you email me, I'd be happy to send you on to this guy who's the world's expert in this, but I'm not sure it would be very helpful. But what it means basically is brain health, which corresponds to cognitive capacity. Okay.
Well, thanks. And I will email you because I just would like to clarify this when it's used a lot in articles about hearing
Yes.
and about speech processing and things like that. So it'd be a
Sure.
very nice thing too. So thanks. I'll email you.
Please do. Yeah. Great.
I think Joanne Jones had a question. Joanne, if you can unmute yourself.
All right, it's more a comment, and I'd like to thank Jan for her explanation on how to read the charts and the difference between risk, because not only am I involved with hard of hearing groups, I'm also facilitating a tinnitus support group, and we're trying to look at all of the research, and I'm trying to, well among ourselves, learn how to evaluate. Like I've been telling them, if something promises you, take 10 pills and you're going to be perfect, forget it. And we've been looking at how do you evaluate the scientific data that is coming through. And I loved your explanations. If this recording is available, I might be just running it to the tinnitus group as well and just say, look at these charts, understand what they actually mean. So
It's
thank you
very
so much for
challenging,
that.
very challenging for a layperson to look at science. And this
Yes.
is one of the problems, right? So we just, if we can't understand the science, we just kind of go back to these words and the statistics that people use, which often are very misleading also.
Yeah.
Have you heard the expression lies, damn lies, and
And
statistics?
statistics.
Yeah,
I
so
was a
statistics
science,
also can mislead people. It's a problem. Yeah.
and I was a science teacher, so I sort of understand control groups. I'm trying to explain to them, if there's no control group, how do you know it's not a placebo effect? But I'll
It's
stop
really a
there.
problem in the
Let people
tinnitus
talk.
literature.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, sure.
Rebecca, I think you had a question. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Okay. Comments really. One is there hasn't been anything said about various groups for, say, late deafened people like ALDA, which has several chapters, or about, talk about social isolation. That's one fix. And the other is nothing's been said about being more visual. Not always, it's not always good to depend on fixing hearing like aids, cochlear implants, whatever. That's kind of honest and insulting in a way, because how about learning how to be more visual, some kind of visual or deaf rehab, or even learning sign language if we don't know it, and even going to deaf community events. Yeah.
Great ideas. Lots of places we can get together. I personally have found being a member of HLAA to be incredibly anti-isolating. To find my peers has been really wonderful. And I agree. And ALDA also provides that, of course. Good point.
I'm not sure if there are other questions or other things folks want to raise. Let me look at the chat here. Oh, Lenora.
Yeah, I actually put this in the chat too. I wondered if the correlation between education and cognitive reserve might both stem from the people with cognitive reserve being more likely to go for higher education,
Possibly, yeah, possibly.
or a mix. Could
Yep.
easily be a mix.
Yep.
That was all. Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, just gonna pop up. There's a question in the chat. It says, this may not be something we can answer, but the question is, would you expect, or do you know if in the deaf population, the big D deaf population, will not have the same level of risk as long as they are part of a big D deaf community?
I don't know the answer to that, but I completely share your intuition.
Hey folks, C. Butler, if you'll unmute yourself and ask your question.
I don't have a question. I just have a statement that I'd like to sincerely thank Dr. Blustein for her presentation. It was very, very informative, and I'm grateful for the knowledge that she has shared. Thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Yes, we definitely, Dr. Blustein, this has been a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Oh, looks like Wendy has a question.
I do. I'm sorry for not being on my camera, but I share what you said. I'm very happy with what you said about the stigma and the danger of that stigma, not only in our own minds and the stress for us, but how we may be treated by, especially how we may be treated by physicians as we age, or by policymakers and insurance. And ageism is already such a problem that when, in stereotyping about dementia, that I'm wondering what HLAA, maybe with AARP, and what the rest of us can do to advocate both for just less ageism in general, because that would help those of us with hearing loss, but also specifically about this link that you're talking about. I'm a retired policy professional and clinical psychologist and lawyer. So I live in Washington, D.C. I have retired. I retired actually partly because of my hearing loss, because I didn't realize it seemed at the time that it couldn't be corrected. And anyway, I won't go into my personal, but my question is about what can be done at the advocacy level to try to stem this.
I think that's a great question. It's very unfortunate that the AARP has magnified the message that hearing loss is a risk for dementia. They very much align themselves with that message, and I think it's not good. I would really love it if you'd send me an email and help me to think this through. I think HLAA is a little bit is beginning to become aware of this as an issue. I think part of the reason I've been invited perhaps is that there's more awareness at HLAA. I think this is the messaging around this is problematic. I could go on and on about this. Let's talk.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Are there other questions? Anyone else want to raise their hand? Or Carla, I don't know if you see anything else in the chat.
Yeah, Jan, would you be willing to share your email? Because in case people have further questions, they can email you directly. There's another question in the chat is, when is a cochlear implant warranted? How will the surgeon determine whether to do the implant? Perhaps when should it be taken off the table? I have mild memory loss. So I'm guessing they're asking when cochlear implants should be considered, just like any other hearing devices, possibly.
Yeah, that's above my pay grade, I think. Talk to your audiologist, talk to your cochlear implant specialist, but I would not get one of these procedures in order to prevent dementia. That's not the point. The point is to hear better and live better. Let's see, what did I want to say? I've really enjoyed.
There's one more question from Emily Edwards. Emily, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm 39. I was diagnosed with mild hearing loss at 37. So it's still pretty new for me. But it really was compelling when they mentioned this possible correlation to me about the risk of dementia, because that's already something that runs in my family. And so part of the reasons that I was willing to wear hearing aids now is because of that risk. So I don't want to, definitely didn't take it as this like overly negative thing. It didn't seem like a death sentence or, to be dramatic, but it helped me. So just wanted to put that out there.
That's really a good point. So Emily, I think is your name, right?
Yes,
What you're saying is that this message can be motivating for some people, right?
absolutely.
It's a
Yes.
double-edged sword, and this is what I get back when I talk to people in the field who say, this is a good message because it will motivate people. And I think that there are some people who are motivated by this kind of message and some people who are devastated by this kind of message. And
Mhm.
it depends kind of on what kind of person you are. And I'm more inclined to respect the reactions of people who are going to be devastated by the message. I think younger people are have a terrific attitude towards maintaining health that older people are just coming around to. So all I'll say is that different people, different reactions. I really appreciate your thought on that. And there certainly are people in the clinician community who share your take on this. Also, I think we have a little bit more time. Some people have said that the message is potent. The message that I don't like is potent in the policy context because we're fighting to have for example, hearing aids approved for under Medicare. And if we can say that they're going to prevent dementia, then maybe that'll fly. So in other words, it's kind of stretching the truth in order to get something to happen. So this is complicated. I agree with you, Emily, point taken. And it's something for me and the person who talked to me just mentioned the policy world to think about. Thanks for sharing that.
Jen, I think we have time for about one more question. I think Melanie had her hand up. Melanie, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mel, and I am working with a local surgeon on a cochlear implant versus getting greater hearing aids. And so I'm wondering about, I have mild memory loss, and the surgeon said to me that she didn't want to do the surgery because of that. But I have a hearing coach, and she's been around a long time and has 2 implants, and she told me it has no bearing. Is that definitive?
That as far as I know, that is true, that it has, even people with mild cognitive impairment benefit from cochlear implantation.
Okay.
And there's scientific evidence to that effect. I
Okay,
think
thank you.
there's more than one study, I think. So, if you go into Google Scholar, and you can probably find those papers, and maybe show them to your surgeon and say, hey.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I think there's 2 more questions. Melissa, do we want to ask Jo if she has time for a couple more questions?
Sure. If people can stay on, I can stay on. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jo, are you able to stay on to capture? Okay.
Yes, the captioner can too.
All right.
All
Go
right.
ahead.
Benjamin, if you want to go next.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
My question is there any evidence that using hearing aids when your hearing loss is mild will affect the course of your hearing deterioration?
I don't know the answer to that. Do I see Barbara Weinstein, one of the world's experts in geriatric audiology, up in the corner there?
Yeah. So,
Barbara, that's a question for you.
okay, so I just I'll just answer comment on candidacy for CI if one has a mild cognitive impairment, and it does not preclude people from getting cochlear implants. What's interesting is that they might screen for cognitive impairment because when after surgery, they want to know whether or not somebody has some cognitive impairment because they want to be prepared. Perhaps the surgery might be a little bit delirium, but that's just very temporary. So, and there are plenty of studies of people who get cochlear implants and who have cognitive decline, and so it's not a deal breaker at all. And I want to comment on the social prescribing. Interestingly, great comment, and I have a presentation coming up where I talk about social isolation, social agent, and audiologists need to recommend hearing aids and social prescribe as well, incorporating that. And in terms of that mild hearing loss question, there is one or two studies that if you do have hearing aids, they're protective in that your speech understanding scores remain the same if you're wearing hearing aids. That's just one study suggesting that they are protective.
So the answer to your question was yes, they are protective. Interesting. Okay.
Okay, Jan, what is your email?
Yeah, I'll say it. It's my name, jan.blustein@nyu.edu. But if you Google me, you'll see my email address. So I'm not going to spell it out. Okay. Or maybe I'll put it in the chat. That's what I can do too, everyone.
And I think that Barbara also had a question, or she has her hand raised as well.
Answer the question about the cognitive, so I'll lower my hand. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. Well, we are now a few minutes over, and it looks like we've answered all the questions, at least everybody who had their hands raised. Dr. Blustein, thank you again so much for doing this. I think it was really helpful and really helped dispel some of the myths and concerns around there. This recording and the PowerPoint will be up on the HLAA website, hearingloss.org. So you can see that. It will probably be a couple of weeks before it's up, but it will be up, and we will also email it out, email a link to the recording and the PowerPoint out to everyone who registered for this this meeting. So thank you so much. I hope this was helpful, and we'll be doing more of these. Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys, for attending. I really enjoyed talking to you. I hope this recording will be used by chapters to spark discussion on this very important topic. I really would love to see HLAA chapters get active along this issue and really kind of use their social support of each other to kind of buck each other up. You know, it's going to be okay. And thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye now.